In my video on binary opposition, I taught you some pretty nice tools for analyzing culture. So I thought it would be cool if we could visit my personal favorite civilization, ancient Egypt. It also helps that it's an excellent example of what I taught you in that video, but who cares about that? I want to go to Egypt. The ancient Egyptians, for thousands of years, lived along the Nile in a vast desert. Where the Nile snakes through the desert, along its banks is a land so fertile you could grow things by accident. Imagine being in your backyard and you're holding the seeds to some flower you want to grow and, well, you drop some of them by accident. You can't be bothered to pick it up, it's just seeds. You come back later and boom, you've discovered that those seeds became those flowers all by themselves. You didn't have to do anything. If I remember correctly, all the Egyptians had to do to sow their seeds was let their cattle walk all over their farm. Every year, at the same time, the Nile would flood, depositing hyper-fertilizing silt onto those banks of the Nile, which is how that land was so fertile that you could grow things by accident. Because this happens, life is great. Food grows in plenty, and it doesn't take very much effort to do it. This, naturally, for the Egyptians, makes them really like the orderly and regular nature of the Nile, that basically, for them, everything goes to plan, life is going to be more than fine. Imagine living on this strip of land that grows everything you could ever need with no problems, but that just beyond it is this vast land of empty, dead, shifting, chaotic, warping, sandy desert. Now, remember, if you're an ancient Egyptian, or really an ancient anything, you don't really get out very much. Traveling for fun really isn't a thing for most people. It wouldn't even be that weird if you never left the village you were born in, that you lived and died in the same village having never left. So this river, this happy, healthy land beside, and the vast, endless desert beyond, is all most Egyptians would have ever known for most of their lives, for thousands of years, over thousands of generations. You wouldn't know that there was a world away from the Nile, beyond the desert. If I remember correctly, they sometimes referred to foreign people as people who live where the Nile is only in the sky. Egyptian culture has something called Ma'at, which is like a cosmic force or element. It's sometimes personified as a god, but effectively it translates into order. I say roughly translate because what the Egyptians attach to order are things like justice, authority, stability, balance, and fairness. That force, that element, is opposed by another, called Isfet. Roughly translated, it means something like chaos, to which they attach to chaos destruction, unfairness, uncertainty, injustice, randomness, imbalance to that concept.
Does it feel familiar yet?
What the Egyptians see is a river and a land that goes through the same cycle every single year. And when that cycle happens, when everything goes according to plan, life is good. But when change happens, when something changes to that cycle, life is bad. When you look beyond that land, you see the desert. You see something empty of life, something that is constantly changing, where no order can be found. Chaotic lifelessness. You can probably start to see where the Egyptians got their belief in Ma'at and Isfet. That land that gives them life and the river that runs between, they call the Black Land, named after the silty water that runs through the Nile, that magic ingredient that makes it all possible. That land that lies beyond, that chaotic death, they call it the Deshret, which, funny enough, is where our word for desert comes from. Ironically, the land that they call the Black Land is not the one they attach to, all the horrible things of darkness like I explained in my other video. For the Egyptians, Ra is king of the cosmos, and it is his job to maintain Ma'at in the cosmos, to maintain order. Horus is both the god and king over Earth, who is embodied by the living pharaoh. As the living god king, they are charged with maintaining Ma'at here on Earth. You can imagine, based on Egyptian beliefs, that it isn't terribly hard for them to accept a concept like a god king. They're people who want things to be orderly, to be stable. They just want their life to be simple. Often, when Egypt becomes unstable or chaotic, one of the reasons is usually the Nile stopped flooding on time, which, once that happens, things only get worse from there. What I'm sure really sucks is having to be the pharaoh in all of that. The Nile and all its functions is your people's symbol of Ma'at, and it is your job to make sure Ma'at is maintained and to make sure it's protected. And when those things don't happen, those are usually the periods of times when you see reigns of kings become progressively shorter and shorter. Egyptians, after the fact, would write about these periods of chaos in a kind of prophetic style. I remember my teacher quoting a line from a translation of one. It went, "The world had become topsy-turvy." They really wrote about these periods like the apocalypse had come, like the end of times, which, of course, is fascinating reading as to why they think that, but it's also kind of funny, because these people, their civilization, would go on to live for 3,000 years, surviving the Bronze Age collapse. They would outlive the people who were there at the beginning of their civilization, the people who came after them, and the people who came after them.